Study Session 11. Population Policies in Nigeria. Introduction. In this lecture, discussion shall be on the issues relating to population in the world at large, and Nigeria in particular. I shall begin by discussing the state of world population, the challenges posed by rapid increase in the world population, population policies in both developed and developing countries, and Nigeria in particular. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. Discuss the state of world population. 2. Discuss the challenges posed by increase in the world population. 3. Explain the population policies in the developed and developing countries. And 4. Explain the population policies in Nigeria. Pretest. 1. Critically assess the state of world population. 2. Briefly examine the challenges posed by the increase in the world population. 3. Explain briefly the population policies in developed and developing countries. 4. Discuss the population policies in Nigeria with specific examples. The United Nations (UN), an accepted authority on population levels and trends, estimates that world population reached 6 billion in 1999 and increasing annually by more than 77 million persons. The rate of increase, 1.3% per year, has fallen below the peak rate of 2% per year attained by 1970. By the late 2040s, the UN estimated that growth rate will have fallen to about 0.64% annually, at which time more than 50 countries will experience negative growth. Estimates of world population before 1900 were based on fragmentary data, but scholars agree that for most of human existence, long-run average population growth approached approximately 0.002% per year, or 20 per million inhabitants. According to UN estimates, the population of the world was about 300 million in the year AD 1, and it took more than 1,500 years to reach the 500 million mark. Growth was not steady, but was marked by oscillations dictated by climatic changes, food supply, diseases, and wars. Starting in the 17th century, great advances in scientific knowledge, agriculture, industry, medicine, and social organization made possible rapid acceleration in population growth. Machines gradually replaced human and animal labor. People slowly acquired the knowledge and means to control diseases. By 1900, the world population had reached 1.65 billion, and by 1960, it stood at 3.04 billion. Beginning about 1950, a new phase of population growth was ushered in when famine and disease could be controlled even in areas that had not yet attained a high degree of literacy or a technologically developed industrial society. This happened as a result of the modest cost of importing the vaccines, antibiotics, insecticides, and high-yielding varieties of seeds produced since the 1950s. With improvements in water supplies, sewage disposal facilities, and transportation networks, agricultural yields increased and deaths from infections and parasitic diseases greatly declined. Life expectancy at birth in most developing countries increased from about 35 to 40 years in 1950 to 66 years by 2000. The rapid decline in deaths among people who maintain generally high fertility rates led to annual population growth that exceeded 3.1% in many developing nations, a rate that doubles population size in 23 years. Below is a diagram of the distribution of world population in 2005. In a nutshell, the world population is the total number of humans on the earth at a given time. By February 2008, the world's population was believed to have reached over 6.65 billion. In line with population projections, this figure continues to grow at rates that were unprecedented before the 20th century, although the rate of increase has almost halved since its peak, which was reached in 1963, of 2.2% per year. The world's population, on its current growth trajectory, is expected to reach nearly 9 billion by 2050. The population challenges. The population challenges. From 1950 to 2000, the world's population grew from about 2.5 billion to more than 6 billion. The pace of population growth may continue to increase. Can the world's land and resources support the demands of so many people? In a March 2003 feature article in the Encounter Yearbook, Lester Brown, the founder and president of the World Watch Institute, discussed the causes and problems of population growth and explained measures countries can take to stabilize their populations. According to some demographers, the population of the world grew at an infinitesimal rate for most of human history, about 0.002% per year. Not until the 17th century, with advances in science, agriculture, and industry, did world population begin to accelerate. Over the next 300 years, the world's population increased fivefold, from about 500 million in 1650 to about 2.5 billion in 1950. The diagram above is the population evolution in different continents. The vertical axis is logarithmic, and it expresses millions of people. In the second half of the 20th century, the population grew even faster, reaching more than 6 billion in 2000, according to the United Nations. These figures mean that the world's population has grown more in 50 years than it did during the more than 4 million years since our early ancestors first stood upright. This unprecedented growth in population, combined with rising individual consumption of food, water, and natural resources, has begun to strain Earth's capacity to sustain human life. Demands for water are draining supplies from aquifers, layers of permeable rock, sand, or gravel that serve as repositories of water, and other water sources. Demand for fish, a food staple in many areas of the world, is contributing to the depletion of fish stocks around the world. Human activities that cause pollution and encroach on habitats are responsible for the extinction of plant and animal species since the dinosaurs disappeared about 65 million years ago. Meanwhile, global warming, an increase in Earth's surface temperature caused largely by the burning of fossil fuels, has begun to change Earth's climate in ways not yet fully understood. In short, the growth in human population and the scale of human activities appear to be redirecting the natural course of our planet. The 15 most populous nations. From DSW Data Report 2006, Dutch Stiftong Wereldbevolking. Number 1. China, with 1.32 billion, about 20% of world's population. Number 2. India, with 1.12 billion, about 17% of the world's population. Number 3. United States, with 300 million, about 4.6%. Number 4, Indonesia, 225 million, about 3.5%. Number 5, Brazil, 186 million, about 2.8%. Number 6, Pakistan, with 165 million, about 2.5%. Number 7, Bangladesh, 147 million, about 2.3%. Number 8, Russia, with 143 million, about 2.2%. Number 9, Nigeria, 140 million, about 2.1%. Number 10, Japan, with 128 million, about 2.0%. Number 11, Mexico, 108 million, about 1.7%. Number 12, Vietnam, 87 million, about 1.3%. Number 13, Philippines, 86 million, about 1.3%. Number 14, Germany, 82 million, about 1.3%. Number 15, Egypt, 75 million, about 1.2%. Population policies in developed countries. Government population policies seek to contribute to national development and welfare goals through measures that directly or indirectly aim to influence demographic processes, in particular fertility, migration, etc. Examples include statutory minimum ages for marriage, program to promote the use of contraceptives, and controls on immigration. When such policies are adopted for other than demographic reasons, they can be termed implicit policies. European countries did not address the issue of a national population policy until the 20th century. Subsidies were granted to expanding families by such disparate nations as the United Kingdom, Sweden, and the USSR. The Italian fascists in the 1920s and the National Socialist Nazis in Germany during the 1930s made population growth an essential part of their doctrines. Japan, with an economy comparable to those of the European nations, was the first developed country in modern times to initiate a birth control program. In 1948, the Japanese government formally instituted a policy using both contraception and abortion to limit family size. European pronatalist policies were conspicuously unsuccessful in 1930s, and their milder variations over the past few decades in, for example, France and many Eastern European nations have apparently done little to slow a continuing fertility decline. Government control of migration is more straightforward. Short-term migration tied to labor demands, guest workers, has been a common practice in Western Europe, allowing the various nations the flexibility to curtail migration during economic recessions. Population policies in developing countries. With special reference to India in 1952, India took the lead among developing nations in adopting an official policy to slow its population growth. India's stated purpose was to facilitate social and economic development by reducing the burden of a young and rapidly growing population. Surveys to ascertain contraceptive knowledge, attitude, and practice showed a high proportion of couples wishing no more children. Few, however, practiced efficient contraception. Family planning programs were seen as a way to satisfy a desire for contraception by a large segment of the population, and also to confer health benefits from spacing and limiting births. Asia's lowered growth rate can be attributed mainly to the stringent population policies in China. Although it has a huge population, China has successfully reduced both fertility and mortality. the government has recently been advocating one-child families to lower the nation's growth rate. By 1979, more than 90% of the population in developing countries lived under government that, in principle at least, supported access to contraceptives by their citizens based on considerations of health and the right to choose to have children and to space them at desired intervals. Recent evidence indicates that progress towards the objectives of lowered fertility and national growth is being achieved in many nations, in part by government support for family planning programs. The case in Nigeria. Existing studies on population in Nigeria have laid extensive emphasis on fertility. Estimates of fertility levels have generally portrayed Nigeria as one of the most fertile countries in Africa, south of the Sahara, with an estimated crude birth rate of 47 to 51 per 1,000 population in 1974 and 48 to 52 in 1982. Nigeria has therefore been experiencing persistent high fertility that has led to its increasing population from 63 million in 1963 to 88 million in 1991 and over 140 million in 2006. Nigeria Census 1963, 1992, 2006. Awareness of the population growth in Nigeria led to her first national population policy in February 1988, Federal Republic of Nigeria 1988. The 1988 National Population Policy, amongst other things, stressed the importance of reducing population growth through effective family planning and efficient contraceptive use. The urgency to implement such a policy cannot be overemphasized in light of the decreasing child mortality arising from the expanded program on immunization and oral rehydration therapy, programs that have gained extensive support from government, national and international agencies such as UNICEF, UNDP, etc. An important factor in controlling the rapid population growth in Nigeria is the low rate of contraception, World Bank 1989, and inefficient use of contraceptive among the few users. According to the 1981-82 Nigerian Fertility Survey, 66.3% of 8,448 respondents say they never heard of any method, as opposed to 84.9% who say they have used a method. 12.5% patronize the inefficient method, e.g., douche, rhythm, coitus interruptus, charms, etc. And only 2.6% use the efficient method, e.g., pills, IUD, condom, etc. This picture is further worsened by the data on currently married women and non-pregnant women, which show that 6.2% are using some type of contraceptives as opposed to 93.8% who are not patronizing any method. The country's contraceptive prevalence rate, CPR, was estimated to be 5% in 1987. The implication of rapid population growth is becoming more glaring to the populace in light of the falling standard of living amongst the majority. The situation was further worsened with the implementation of a number of government programs, particularly the Structural Adjustment Program, SAP. Hence, the adopted National Population Policy of 1988 states that the targets of the policy of 1988 are as follows. Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1988. Number 1. To reduce the proportion of women who got married before the age of 18 years by 50% in 1995 and 80% by the year 2000. 2. To achieve birth spacing of a minimum of 2 or more years interval in at least 50% of married women of childbearing age by 1995 and 80% by the year 2000. 3. To reduce pregnancy of mothers below 18 years and above 35 years of age by 50% by 1995 and 80% by the year 2000. Number 4. To exert the coverage of family planning service to 50% of women of childbearing age by 1995 and 80% by the year 2000. Number 5. To reduce the proportion of women bearing more than 4 children by 50% by 1995 and 80% by the year 2000. Number 6. To direct a significant proportion of the family planning programs in terms of family life, education, and appropriate family planning service to all adult males by the year 2000. Number 7. To reduce number of children a woman is likely to have during her lifetime, now from over 6 to 4 per woman by the year 2000. Number 8. To reduce the present rate of population growth from about 3.3% per year to 2.5% by 1995 and 2.0% by the year 2000. It is important to note that these targets were not met, thereby necessitating the revision of the policy by setting new goals, objectives, and targets in 2004. The goals of this latest policy are: 1. Achievement of sustained economic growth, poverty eradication, protection and preservation of the environment, and provision of quality social services. 2. Achievement of the balance between the rate of population growth, available resources, and the social and economic development of the country. 3. Progress towards a complete demographic transition to a reasonable growth in birth rates and low death rates. 4. Improvement in the reproductive health of all Nigerians at every stage of the life cycle. 5. Acceleration of strong and immediate response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic and other related infectious diseases. 6. Progress in achieving balanced and integrated urban and rural development. To achieve these goals, certain targets were set. In a nutshell, targets are useful tools to monitor and evaluate implementation of the national policy on population for sustainable development over time. The government of Nigeria has set a goal of a 2% population growth by 2015 or beyond in its national economic policy. The targets for reduction in the total fertility rate and increases in modern contraceptives prevalence indicated below are consistent with this goal. The following key targets have been set to guide policy, program planning, and implementation. Number 1. Achieve a reduction of the national population growth rate of 2% or lower by the year 2015. Number 2. Achieve a reduction in the total fertility rate of at least 0.6 children every 5 years. Number 3. Increase the modern contraceptive prevalence rate by at least 2% per year. Number 4. Reduce the infant mortality rate to 35 per 1,000 live births by 2015. Number 5. Reduce the child mortality rate to 45 per 1,000 live births by 2015. Number 6. Reduce the maternal mortality rate to 125 per 100,000 live births by 2010 and to 75 by 2015. Number 7. Eliminate the gap between men and women in enrollment in secondary, tertiary, vocational, and technical education and training by 2015. Number 8. Eliminate illiteracy by 2020. Number 9. Achieve a 25% reduction in HIV adult prevalence every year. It is against the background of the policies above that this lecture examines the impact of rural community structures on the adopting of efficient contraceptive methods. The study departed from the standpoint that variation in rural communities of Nigeria in terms of social, cultural, economic, and infrastructural development are bound to have considerable influence on attitudes towards the adoption of efficient modern contraceptive techniques. It becomes essentially important to identify those rural community indicators critical to the adoption and non-adoption to ensure a successful propagation and implementation of programs for an approved contraceptive prevalence rate (CPR) in rural communities of Nigeria. The Nigerian government has integrated family planning in the primary health care and women development programs so as to improve the availability and distribution of family planning services to the Nigerian populace. It is expected that the contraceptive prevalence rate (CPR) will rise from its low level to 50 to 60% within the next decades. Such expectations indicates not less than 10-fold increase in CPR during this period, and it is definitely an uphill task, particularly in a country with widespread illiteracy, limited urbanization, preponderance of farmers and related workers in the workforce, traditionalism in religious beliefs, high adult mortality, low age at marriage, universality of marriage, polygamy, poverty, and limited knowledge or negative attitude towards the practice of modern methods of fertility regulation. Study session summary. In this lecture, we have discussed the issue of population. We have argued that in 2000, the United Nations estimated that the world's population was then growing at the rate of 1.14%, or about 75 million people per year, down from a peak of 86 million per year in 1987. In the last few centuries, the number of people living on Earth has increased many times over. By the year 2000, there were 10 times as many people on Earth than there were 300 years ago. In February 2008, the world's population is believed to have reached over 6.65 billion. In line with population projections, this figure continues to grow at rates that were unprecedented before the 20th century, although the rate of increase has almost halved since its peak, which was reached in 1963, of 2.2% per year. The world's population, on its current growth trajectory, is expected to reach nearly 9 billion by the year 2050. We finally examine the population policies in the developed and developing countries, with special reference to Nigeria's 1988 population policy. With that, we've come to the end of study session 11. Thank you for listening.